Alan Leeds is in the house, and he has managed everybody from in some form of management capacity. Prince, James Brown, Cameo, D'Angelo, Kiss, which is the oddball in the bunch. Raphael Sadiq, Maxwell, Barry White, Chris Rock, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Bootsy Collins, Bootsy's Rubber Band. I mean, it's just amazing. So it is an honor for me to be able to bring this gentleman into the stream, Mr. Alan Leeds.
that applause track that you use, it sounds like one of those machines that grinds up pavement. When they're going to redo the driveway, they have a machine that just goes. That's kind of what it sounds like.
He's saying it's easy on the ears, Jeff.
I'll keep it simple. I'll just.
Andrew says he's going to take the old board off my hands. Well, this is perfect. It served us well. Yes.
I had really looked forward to doing the pre-show. Because I understand you get paid double time for that. So I was,
Let's not mention liquor.
I thought my check would be bigger.
Don't mention alcohol.
That'll make all your other guests happy.
So, yeah, we had your brother Eric on the show a couple of weeks ago with St. Paul Peterson. And one of the things he said was, actually, that was in the interview we did before when the World Series was happening. Right. And he said, "Oh, how do I get paid?" And we said, "What did we say we were going to pay him in Jack Daniels
or alcohol or drinks?"
Yeah, we I accidentally said it again. And he was, and Facebook wouldn't. For some reason, there was something because of the fact that we mentioned alcohol consumption. It was just like, what? You guys are getting way too heavy-handed. It's just getting ridiculous.
Wow. Then I better not tell you what I do.
No, it's perfectly fine. We'll just
they took off alcohol. They'll lock you up for me.
I bet you got some stories for sure. Susan, you couldn't have said it better. Welcome, Mr. Leeds. So looking forward to tonight's conversation. And as I mentioned before, I didn't want this interview to be. I listened to about 4 or 5 interviews with you that you had done over the past, and some of these were excessive. Some was like 2-3 hours. So I was like,
"You need a life. you need a life." That's
I got one. That's for sure. Yeah, that's.
Do you go by Christopher or Chris or
either one? Whatever. Mr. Christopher is the, but you just call me Chris in this. If you're addressing me,
it just sounds so formal, and then you have to call Jeff Mr. Page and call me Mr. Leeds, and start thinking I'm working for James Brown again.
Mr. Christopher had a ring to it, so I just got Mr. Christopher.
Cool.
Sometimes
we can do that.
Yeah, it's all good. But yeah, I could tell 3 of the 5 interviews that you did, I could tell who prepared and who didn't.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, what are one things I wanted to,
what the purpose was.
Right. Yeah, I get that too. But what I wanted to avoid was redundancy. I just wanted to make sure that, you got some fresh questions tonight that maybe that you've never been asked. Kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper because I know that every time that somebody interviews you, the primary focus is always on James Brown or Prince. Right. And it's probably not going to be that much different tonight. However, I did want to dig a little bit deeper and kind of ask some general questions and just kind of figure out who you are. So for all of you massive Prince fans that are in here, I know that you guys want to hear all about Prince, and that's all fine and dandy, but you're going to have patience because we got a legend in the house that has been involved with so many legendary, iconic acts, and we're going to respect that career path for sure.
So that means you want to talk about Julio Iglesias.
Did you work with Julio Iglesias
for 2 days?
Okay, this is a great starting point.
That's going to be our longest topic. That's
right.
That wasn't even in the list of topics, but tell us about your experience with Julio Iglesias for 2 days.
It doesn't take long to tell it because it didn't last very long. He was managed by the same people that were managing, let's see, who in the hell was I on the road with? It must have been Maxwell. And we had a couple days off, and Julio Iglesias was going to play Atlantic City. We had just finished in Atlantic City, and the manager asked me if I would stay and kind of road manage the shows for Iglesias. I guess he hadn't worked in a while and didn't have an assistant or a road manager. So the manager asked me if I would stay and do a couple days with Iglesias in Atlantic City. I was already there, so it's like, yeah, what the hell? It's something else. But,
Right.
we shook hands and met. I escorted a bunch of 85-year-old women to his dressing room after the show, and that was about it.
Right. So that's the extent of it. I mean,
that's pretty much the extent of it. If he saw me today, he wouldn't know me. I'm not sure I'd know him, but.
Well, because I do have a little bit more deeper questions that I'm going to ask you in the scheme of things, because I really want to know, you're a tour manager, and I'm going to kind of go a little bit out of order, Jeff, because I know we have like a list of things, but let's actually, I don't know. I want to start here yet, but I think I'm going to anyways. What exactly, for those who don't know, what exactly are all of the, I guess, the responsibilities of a tour manager? What all are you supposed to handle? I've heard you mention, booking the hotel rooms and obviously making sure that people are where they're supposed to be, but there's obviously a lot of other minutia that has to go on, and it probably changes from band to band. But what, from a big scope, what exactly does a tour manager do?
Make sure basically, I tell people the tour manager's primary function is to make sure you have a really talented, dependable crew, so that all you have to do is sit back and watch it work. and seriously, that's the ideal, because you're kind of responsible for any and everything that happens. And yeah, it means either you doing it or having a bigger tour. You may have an assistant or a road manager who handles the logistics, booking the limos, booking the hotels, et cetera, et cetera. And in many cases, you do it yourself. But it's so much more than that, because when you go on tour, and a lot of this you're going to say, well, duh, but when you go on tour, you're assembling a family. And I say that, every tour says, well, it's like family on the road. Well, most times it's not, but that's the goal, because
it's functional family.
You're really going into an alternative reality.
Right.
You can throw away your watch. I mean, if anybody still wears a watch, but clocks don't matter, because any and everything can happen at any hour. You could be eating meals at 4 a.m. You could be waking up at 2 a.m, going to bed at 6 a.m. I mean, there's no regiment, because everything depends on where's the next gig, how long is the bus ride or the flight, et cetera, et cetera. So you're managing not just the band, but the technical crew, and of course, primarily the artist, and trying to keep everybody happy. And it's pretty much an impossible task. There's always going to be somebody unhappy. But if there's somebody who's not a team player and doesn't really fit or has their own selfish agenda, you want to get that person out real quick, because It's like poison. It's just like, one bad apple spoils the whole thing. So I think a lot of the job is really preparing, because if you've properly prepared for a tour and you got the right people with the right attitude, then barring any unforeseen complications, you roll pretty comfortably. You develop somewhat of a routine. And if you pick this lifestyle for a career, you already know your body clock doesn't exist, and you just roll with shit. But I kind of separated myself as much as possible from the busy work, the logistical stuff. I tried to always have somebody do that.
Smart man.
Quite honestly, I mean, I'd done that for a few years. For example, the KISS tour, that's all I did was logistics. That's the gig. But most of the tours and the artists that I worked with for any length, there's one thing, you freelance a tour, you're hired just to do the tour. For example, I did a Barry White tour, did the whole tour, but was hired at the beginning, and at the end we shook hands and lost each other's number. Tour's over.
Right.
But the relationships with James Brown first, for the better part of 6-7 years, Prince for 10 years, D'Angelo for damn near 20 years.
God.
It was really about being very intimate with the artist and catering to the artist's needs and helping him, in this case, hymns, feel comfortable and feel safe, so that they didn't have to worry about, will the hotel be something that they will like? You've got to get to know these people, know their quirks. And just using the hotel as a metaphor, because it has to do with the type of bus. I mean, you can spend a week just picking a bus for the star of the show because they may be very particular about something, or finding the right bus, but it's the wrong color. So you got to get the bus painted. It's crazy shit like that. But any and everything you can do to make the artist feel comfortable. And the bottom line to everything is, that's my wife in the background on the phone, as usual. She's actually better at this than me. You should have her around.
Would love to, sure.
The biggest thing I tell people is that when shit goes crazy, and it will, it might be a weather complication, or you might have somebody. I was on a tour where the audio, the front of house audio engineer, one of the most important people on the crew, disappeared.
Oh,
we played a show in Miami. We had a couple days off, and then we went to the next city. I can't recall where the next city was, and he wasn't there. He wasn't on the crew bus, but people just assumed that meant he would fly. Sometimes people decide they want to stay over in a city rather than ride the bus, and they buy a plane ticket and meet you in the next town. The guy disappeared. So we got to the show, and there's no front of house guy. Now, that's when everybody else panics. The band panics, so it's not going to sound right on stage. The artist panics. Everybody panics.
Right.
You have to be the one who doesn't panic. Inside, your guts might be churning, but you have to show a steady, calm demeanor that you have it under control. The whole point of being a tour manager is making everybody think you have everything under control. And 50% of the time you're bullshitting. You don't. But the point is to keep it rolling and keep everybody happy. That's what you got to do. And I think that's the most difficult thing for a tour manager to learn, because shit will go kittywampus. It's bound to. And artists, as you all know very well, are temperamental, impulsive, scare easily. They're insecure. Most artists. And so the whole point is just keep them happy, keep them secure, make them feel safe, that you got everything under control. And all they have to worry about is their art.
Yeah.
So let me follow up with that then, because what you're referring to is really trusting in your people to make sure everything runs smooth as possible.
Of course.
So when you end up becoming a tour manager for someone, whether it's for a day or two, things like that. Oh, well, not the 2-day thing, but how often do you get to actually pick that crew as opposed to coming into an existing crew that's been there?
That's a really good question. It really depends on the artist. You may come aboard with an artist that already has a lot of people in place that he or she is really happy with. And if that's the case, you don't rock the boat.
Right. Right.
But if you're coming in from the very beginning, like, for example, when I did with Maxwell, because I guess he had done a few odd dates, but I don't think he had toured before I came aboard. And we really started from scratch. And we didn't have the budget to attract the kind of professionals that I would have liked to had. So we had to get some less experienced guys and kind of make lemonade. But as Maxwell's career blew up, Each tour, we had a bigger budget. Each tour, I was able to bring in more people that I knew I could trust, that I also thought their personalities were such that they would bond with Max, and really kind of built that from the ground up, which was a challenge and a lot of fun. Similarly with D'Angelo, because when I came aboard for the Voodoo tour, he had certainly toured before, but it had been years earlier, and none of those people were still around. Well, I think maybe a couple, but so we were kind of starting from scratch. The key there for me is to have a production manager who's essentially the boss of the crew.
Right.
Have a guy there that's my guy. We're boys. It's got to be somebody that you're close with.
Okay.
I've had situations where I inherited a production manager who turned out to be a backstabber. I would tell the artist one thing and he would go tell him something else, trying to score brownie points. You get those kind of people. Well, that guy had to go. And the artist liked him. So it took a while. I had to just kind of manipulate it so he would hang himself. And eventually, after a couple of weeks, he did. But, you know, that's kind of rare. Usually, there's a gentleman by the name of Bill Reeves. And honestly, for behind the scenes, Bill Reeves, you think my resume is crazy, you ought to see his. He's done damn near every artist that I've done, in addition to Luther Vandross and Vogue, R. Kelly, God knows who, Anthony Hamilton.
Wow.
I mean, Bill Reeves, and he's like an elite level production manager. He and I've worked together for years. We met on a Prince tour. Actually, I think he was on the 1999 tour when I came aboard. And he certainly, I think he was stage manager on Purple Rain, which was a huge crew, of course. And then he graduated to becoming a production manager. And we got to the point where whenever one of us had a tour, we'd reach out to see if the other was available because we just worked so well as a team.
Okay.
Wow. I mean, you know, whenever I go to a concert, I don't know where this came from, but I will always habitually look around and try to assess how much the artist is making on that particular show. I was like, okay, I know how much I paid for my ticket, and just try to do numbers in my head. And it's like something I'm cursed with. And I don't, do you ever do that? Do you ever go to a concert and just look around and go, oh yeah, he's taking a bath on this show, or because
yeah, God forbid you got empty seats, you know, it's not a good sign.
Yeah, does something have to be so? I mean, how much does an artist stand to make on like say, for instance, let's just take Purple Rain, for instance. Purple Rain was a studio, an arena tour, but about, just rough guesstimate, about how much do you think the band was clearing in a show for an arena? And I know there's different arena size, but after the lighting crew is paid, after all that stuff is done,
without giving you real numbers,
right?
Either because I've forgotten or I just don't think it's right.
Okay.
In a case like the Purple Rain tour, which was, you know, a guaranteed advance sellout in every town. I mean, it was the hottest ticket in me. It was like the Purple Rain, for those of you who aren't old enough to have gone through that phenomenon.
Amazing.
For about a year, it was like the Beatles coming to America for the first time. It was really insane.
Yeah.
And I mean, we sold out, I think, 7 nights in the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, and sold them all out as quick as they could print the tickets. It's like, you know, it was just stupid. In a tour like that, you make an arrangement, and when I say you, it would be his booking agents, make an arrangement with a promoter for the whole tour. And there's a guarantee per night with a percentage over a certain amount. So let's just pick a number out of a hat and say the guarantee is $250,000. It wouldn't have been back then because tickets were much less cheaper, but it's certainly feasible today. Maybe even modest today. But let's just use the number, $250,000. And then maybe you get 50% of everything over 500,000. In other words, you go to the box office, you count up all the ticket sales, after all the commissions and the ticket fees and all that bullshit, sit there and say, okay, we grossed $600,000 tonight. Well, the artist gets the 250 guarantee plus another 50,000, which is his 50% of the excess over 500,000.
Right.
Does it make sense? I don't know if I'm
explaining. I'm
not a math teacher.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was always trying to figure out.
And that's usually the case in most arena tours. There's a very hefty guarantee with a percentage if it really just blows up through the roof.
And
now, obviously, in a case like Maxwell, who was on his first album and his very first tour, you're just hoping somebody buys some tickets.
Right.
Yeah. What do you do when you're in the face of a guarantee of somebody you don't even know? You don't even know how many people are going to show up. What do you do as a tour manager? Where do you go? Like, I don't know. Do you make up a guarantee? Do you kind of like make an assessment in your head?
Because
album sales?
You mean in advance what to ask for?
Right. Exactly.
In terms of the guarantee? Well, you have to look at what your costs are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And come up with something realistic so that you're not going to lose money.
Yeah.
And, in a case where it's a new artist working a first album, you're looking at the promotional value as much as anything else. So it's not so much you want to expect to make a ton of money because you're not going to. You're playing clubs or small theaters on a bill with other artists, whatever it takes to get an act established. So you're really just hoping you break even.
Mm.
And maybe you sit there and say, okay, we need a guarantee based on the size of our crew and our travel expenses and you need a guarantee of $25,000 a night, just to, again, pick a number out of a hat.
Mm.
And you hope that there's enough promoters that are willing to post that to route a tour. Now, most of that responsibility belongs with the booking agent. A tour manager just gets an itinerary after it's all booked, and you say, okay, this is the itinerary. Now I got to make this work.
Yeah.
In the case of D'Angelo, because I was a personal manager, I was part of putting it together, part of routing the tour, which was something I kind of liked to do because I'd learned how to do it with James Brown, because we used to route our own shows. He didn't like working with booking agents or paying 10%. So he actually had us working in-house, and we would actually rent the arenas, make the deals with the arenas, and promote the shows ourselves. Now, the good news is you sell out, all the money's yours. The bad news is if you don't sell out, you can take a bath because you're the promoter all of a sudden. But very few artists take that role. James Brown was the exception.
Yeah, I remember there's the story that you told about a show that I'll let you tell this story. This is definitely going off of the line here, but since you kind of mentioned that there was a time when James Brown was sick and you had to make a decision.
You had to bring that up.
Yeah, there's some listeners who probably have not heard that story. I would love for them to be able to hear that story because
Tell Facebook this is not alcohol.
Same, wink, wink.
It's actually not.
It's not either.
I told you I don't do that.
Yeah, it's been a minute. It's not wine night yet. Yeah, but share that story about the night that James Brown was sick and you had to make a.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. We had a show, I think it was in Providence, Rhode Island. I was home at the time. I lived in Cincinnati where James Brown's offices were. And Mr. Brown was sick. He was in New York. He had done a show the night before in New York. He took sick and he was in bed with a fever and couldn't hold food down. And when he got out of bed, he couldn't walk to the bathroom without stumbling. I mean, he was really, really had a high fever. I guess it was some kind of flu, some bad flu bug. At any rate, Bobby Bird, who was his right-hand man off stage as well as on stage, called me and said, hey, the boss is sick. I don't know about this show tonight. This was in the morning. It was a Sunday. And I had planned to just sit home in bed and watch the Cincinnati Bengals game and just chill out. It was like a Sunday, peaceful Sunday. The show's in Providence. They'll do fine. They'll be back in Cincinnati next week. Meanwhile, I can chill. And I get this call from Bird. So the long and short of it is I start to panic because I'm like, okay, what do I do? The bus had gone ahead. So the band and the crew and everybody was at the gig in Providence ready to set up. And I guess they began setting up. And I just knew, like, I better not cancel the show unless Brown tells me. So I wait a couple hours. I called back and I talked to Bird again. And I said, okay, what's up? What's the deal? And he said, man, he ain't going to make it. There's no way he can make it. Dude is like flat on his back. He's delirious. And we called the doctor. The doctor gave him some kind of antibiotics and told him stay in bed for 3 days, rest his throat. He can't talk. His throat is all raspy. And he gets dizzy when he gets up. It's like, this guy's really, really sick. And I said, Bird, you serious? You sure? So I decided I have to cancel the show to cut our losses. Now, why do I want to cut our losses? Because once the venue opens up and people get in there, now all of a sudden we're paying for the security, for the ushers, for the ticket takers.
Right.
Everybody that's associated with that venue and the production of the show has got to get paid. So if I can cancel it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I can at least save that, right? Now, it's a Sunday, and this is in 1969 or 70. There's no such thing as a cell phone. Most business switchboards are closed on Sundays. So the first challenge was, how in the hell do I reach the radio station that is promoting the show and the venue and so on and so on? And thankfully, I had some backup phone numbers and so on. But it's not like you could just pick up the cell phone and say, hey, cancel the show. No, you had to, it took an hour to reach everybody. Then I had to reach the road manager. He doesn't have a cell phone. So I got to find him, and I got to send somebody from the front of the arena all the way to the backstage, out to the bus to get the road manager to get on the phone so I can tell him what's up. So this is complicated, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I go through all of that, exhale, put the football game on, go back to my bed and just watching football. Then I said, well, it's about 6 o'clock now in the evening. And I said, I better check in on the boss because we got other shows later in the week and see what's up and make sure he's okay. I mean, I love the guy. I'm worried about him. Mm-hmm. Well, they had sent for his wife, Dee Dee, and she flew up from Augusta, Georgia to be with him and nurse him and so on because she was worried about him as well. So I called the hotel in New York where he was staying, and Dee Dee answered the phone. And I said, Ms. Brown, I'm so glad you're there. I'm really worried about him and so on. How is he doing? She said, how in the hell do I know? He got on his Learjet, went to Providence. He was gone before I got here. And I'm like, okay. The Bengals are losing, and so am I. Dude is flying out. He got up out of a sick bed to fly to a show that I've canceled.
Oh, no.
I started thinking about, okay, how long is it going to take before I can pack my shit up and move back to New York and find a new job? It was like, okay, this is not good. And you're dealing with, you got to understand too, you're dealing with a madman. This is not somebody who's reasonable, So I told my girlfriend at the time, I said, about 7:30, this phone is going to ring, and it's going to be the ugliest phone call I've ever had in my life. And it was pretty much so. That's pretty much what happened. He started off, Miss Leeds, understand you canceled the show. Then his voice got a little louder. He said, and I said, well, Mr. Bird said you were, so and so and so and so. He said, is Mr. Bird a doctor? If he was sick, would you go to Bobby Bird? The title of his record. It says, I need help. That's the name of his song. You go call a man who needs help when you're sick. And this went on and on. It was a tirade for about 10 minutes. Finally, he got it all out and he calmed down and he said, you know, son, I love you for caring about me, but I think you care a little too much. Don't you never think about canceling or rescheduling one of my shows without hearing it from me first. And of course he was right. But yeah, that was
so, and you guys probably took
not a good day.
You took a bath on that one.
We definitely took a bath on that one.
Oh my God.
Yeah, because I mean, you're refunding. I mean, sure you can reschedule, but you know how that goes. People's schedules change, and you know, it's like no, it's
so
we didn't take a bath. We took a deluge.
Oh yeah. Have you ever had that something similar to that happen while working with other acts, like a Prince or any other acts? Something where that came up and you had to make that call?
Top of my head, no. Well, then there's D'Angelo.
Yeah, I'm sure D'Angelo was full of surprises.
Who isn't prone to get sick, but he's prone to say he's sick. Because at least 1 out of 3 shows in the afternoon, he'll come knock on your hotel door and say, Pops, he used to call me Pops. He said, Pops, I'm not feeling it today. I don't know if I can get it up to do this show. And then you got his name. What does a tour manager do? You sit with the artist for 20 minutes and pump him up and convince him that he will be able to survive doing a show tonight. That it won't, you know, put him in a hospital. That somehow he can get on stage and sing the songs he loves to sing with musicians he loves to play with to an audience who adores him, to which he's getting paid. Sounds like an easy night to me.
Yeah.
You know, he worked hard on stage. Let's give props. The D'Angelo show is no joke. You and I would be very tired doing what he does on stage. But that's what he chose to do. And he could have cared less about what the cost will be like, well, Pops, what would it cost if we reschedule? We got an off day next week. We'll just come back here. And I'm like, dude, do you understand that there's costs? There's a lot of costs involved. And then there's the issue of the reliability of your professional reputation, which was always a problem because D doesn't come out of the cocoon very often. And when he does, you want to take advantage of it and prop up that career because he's going to disappear again in another year or two. And I love him to death, and I understand the disappearances. I understand that performing is something that is like something he has a love-hate relationship with. And I get that. But it certainly was a challenge because there was never a week went by. And there were cases. There was a case in Europe once where he actually was sitting in his tour bus outside the stage door of the venue and refused to get out of the bus. And I spent about an hour in the bus and I tried every psych move I could think of. And nothing. Just nothing. I even told him, I said, look, go out there, do one song, and then sit down on the side of the stage and tell the audience you're not well and that you're going to do kind of a chill show tonight. And then sit at the keyboard, cut loose, cut out the dancing, just regroup and make it easy on yourself. If you really don't have that urge, just, ad lib. No, that. And it was like, no way. That just was like the stupidest idea he ever heard. So, it's like,
yeah. What exactly? What are you gonna do? And meanwhile, you're probably thinking in the back of your head while you're talking him and doing all this psych work. You're probably talking in the back of your head. You're saying, I wonder what's going on in the house. Is this, how much of the audience is leaving? What's going on during this hour that I'm sitting here trying to get him out? You're like, freaking out.
That was the other thing, is that at some point when I really realized, I mean, I sent a couple of the band. I think I asked Pino Palladino and Chris Dave, the drummer on that tour, to go into the bus and talk to him and give him the musician version. Like, come on, bro, we're a team. We want to do this because the band wants to play.
Yeah.
And we tried that. And that didn't work. Nothing worked. It was just, and he may not have felt well, but this guy wasn't sick. I mean, he was up walking around. He didn't have a fever. He was just not ready to do a show that night. And it reached the point where I had to and meanwhile, you got to understand, there's a promoter inside, there's the head of the venue inside. They're freaking out because if they're going to lose too, and they're worried about crowd reaction. Does the audience get angry and start throwing shit? I mean, shit can happen.
Where was this at? What city was this?
I honestly can't remember. It was, I think.
Did he eventually come out?
It was either I think it was somewhere in the Netherlands, somewhere in Holland.
Yeah, okay.
It's a small town. It wasn't like a major market. I honestly can't remember. But
did he eventually come out? Did he eventually come out?
No. No. He just this was most nights when he was in that mood, I could get him out.
Oh my gosh, that's a crappy ending to that story.
Yeah, it's a horrible ending. But here again, put your tour manager hat on, where you got to realize your radar screen has to be big, and you sit there and say, okay, at some point we've got to go in and make the promoters really angry. And the head of the venue, because they wanted to get on the bus and talk to him, but I knew that wasn't going to work. He was liable to beat him up. I mean, it's like they weren't getting on the bus. But
were you on board with D'Angelo at the Essence Fest? Because Stacy says I was at the Essence Fest in New Orleans when D'Angelo played one song, "Devil's Pie," for an hour.
Yeah, but I remember that. But we played about 10 more songs, and that might have been an hour each. But anyway, long story short, the big thing was at some point I had to tell him to take his bus and get out of there, because the last thing in the world I wanted to have happen is the audience be told that the show is a wrap, nothing's happening, and then the audience who's angry comes out and sees his tour bus.
Right.
Yeah. So for his sake, it's like, okay, dude, you got to scram. Okay. I've tried everything I can. I lost tonight. You won. Now get the hell out of here, because otherwise we're going to have a new problem. So that's what they did. And I just remembered it was Gothenburg, Sweden.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, you have a fantastic memory.
No, I don't. That's why it took so
long. Like your brother is just ridiculous. He could remember the smallest details of like every single show. Oh yeah, that's when we played that song for 12.5 minutes.
You have no idea. We can be sitting talking about a vacation, and I'm not making this up. This has actually happened. Talking about a family vacation we took when we were kids, when I was about 10 years old and Eric was about 5. And he can tell you what we had for dinner at the hotel.
Oh, man.
Seriously. And I'm like, really?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Those people.
Yeah, it's sick. It's you talk about photographic memory. It's bizarre.
And Jeff, you got picture number 1.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Alan, I want you to tell me what I don't think all I'm seeing is we're seeing your logo for right now. Oh, that's a really beautiful logo, though.
Well, thank you very much. Let's try that again.
I actually, I can share it if you don't have it right up. I can do it. Let's see if you got this photo.
I got it. Here we go.
You sure? You positive? Because here it is. Okay. I want, and we're gonna solo this. I want to Yeah, get a little bit of explanation. And I know for all you radio listeners, all you many, many radio listeners all over the world that are listening right now, you can go to facebook.com/Funkatopia or youtube.com/Funkatopia, and you can kind of watch along. But right now, this is a little bit of a visual component. But Alan, can you explain this particular photo to us? Exactly what's happening here? What historic thing are we looking at here? Moment.
I don't think it's a historic moment. It's a pose picture. It's in James Brown's office in Augusta, Georgia. And the other fella, his name is Johnny Terry. He's passed away some years ago. Johnny was one of the original Famous Flames, James Brown's original vocal group that got together in the early 1950s. And he had stopped performing in the 60s, but James hired him on to work in the office as an assistant. So there was a local newspaper in Augusta, Georgia that was doing a feature on James Brown having moved home and opened up an office in Augusta. They were proud of their son, the native son. So the newspaper came in and took a bunch of pictures in the office, and that was one of them.
Wow, this is just it's just such an iconic picture. Matter of fact, I don't know if you have photo 2, but I really want to pull up photo 2, Jeff, because this photo is stunning to me. This this photo here is stunning to me because obviously it really looks like you were photoshopped into this picture.
Yeah, it is weird.
Wasn't even around. But what I find really just intriguing.
Now, and let me stop you for a second. Is that because I'm the only white guy? Why are you saying that?
No, you're not the only white guy, but it's like the positioning. It's like you knew where the camera was. It was like a posed picture that looks like it was cut out and then placed on there.
No, yeah, you're right. It is kind of strange, but no.
The couple of gentlemen behind you were probably like, "Oh, I can get my picture taken with James," and your hair, obviously.
Nobody knew there was a camera. Nobody knew there was a camera there. If you can tell, nobody's really looking in the direction of the camera. I'm not either.
So this
where my eyes are focused.
Yeah. So is this backstage? What's happening here in this particular photo?
It's backstage at the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh. And it was after the show and we were leaving. The fellas with the berets was a kind of Black Panther wannabe group in Pittsburgh that was called the Black Guerrillas, GUE. We had hired them to do security at the show because the Pittsburgh cops were kind of like not Black audience friendly. So we decided that when we came back to Pittsburgh, we would use these guys as security. And they did a great job. And they're backstage. They'd been talking with Brown, and Brown's on his way out to his car to leave the venue. And we're all just walking him out of the dressing room. Behind me, you can just barely see one of her eyes. On the far left, as you're facing the picture, is Gertrude Sanders, who was Brown's longtime wardrobe mistress. She'd been with James since the early 60s, and everybody who knew Brown knew Gertrude. And behind me is then Charles Bobbitt, who was Brown's personal manager for many years.
Wow.
And later went on the road with Michael Jackson and so on. He's kind of a under the radar screen legendary figure. And the guy on the right with the T-shirt with the low collar is a Pittsburgh area disc jockey named Brother Matt Ledbetter, who was a very, very popular disc jockey, radio personality, and he would MC shows. And he was also a personal friend of mine. I lived in Pittsburgh for several years, and Matt and I used to hang out together all the time. He's probably my best friend in Pittsburgh, and just happened to also be in this position in the business. So that's the picture. But I don't think any of us knew that picture was being taken. I got the picture from Matt, actually, who said a friend of his had given him a bunch of pictures that had been taken at the James Brown show. Do you want to see him? And I said, yeah. Oh, you got to give me that one. So.
No, yeah, it's just
there it is. So there's some amateur photographer in Pittsburgh in 1970 took that shot.
it's so iconic. I mean, it's just incredible. Yeah, you can come back, Jeff. Because one of the things that I did want to also share.
And by the way, the afro was real. I mean, now we call it a
How
Jufro.
long did
I
that take you?
would have said that then, but believe it or not, it was real. Much,
How long
much
did that
to my
take you?
parents' chagrin, it was like
How long did that take you to quaff in the morning, or did you just kind of just pick it out and just go with
it.
it?
No, you had to carry a pick. Are you kidding?
Oh
It
yeah,
was
yeah.
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, but it was so perfect. I mean, you see how perfectly rounded that afro was? I mean, it was
Well,
just
in
like
that picture in the office, yeah, because we knew the photographer was coming, so you had to pick it out. And
Good
but
job.
I'll tell you, it wasn't very practical. And the worst was when you would fly have a flight, because as you know, airplane seats are very high.
right. Yeah.
So I had to fly like this, bent over, because if I sat back in the plane to be comfortable, the fro would totally flatten in the back. And it wasn't a good look. I mean, it's not how you want to get off the plane. So my neck would always hurt. I used to hate flying because it was like, oh shit, now my neck's gonna hurt because I gotta bend over the whole damn flight
Oh
because
my
of this stupid fro. But
We got a little shout out for your wife from a friend Rodney. Says the Under the Cherry Moon film crew jacket I own was acquired originally from the amazing Miss Gwen Leeds. Can you tell her thank you so much?
okay, I will.
And Stacy said your afro gets much respect.
Well, thank you very much.
Much.
It's actually, my hair was obviously a lot different than it is now, and this is not what we really want to talk about, is hair. But
No, it's great.
having gone through, I had to go through chemotherapy on a couple of occasions, and as you know, chemo, your hair falls out, which it did. And it grew back much straighter than it used to be. I mean, it used to be very wavy and thick, and it's like post chemo was like, okay, forget about it. Your Jupro days are over.
Oh my gosh. If you still had an afro right now, I think it would just be amazing.
Jufro.
It would.
I would have to be like an ongoing friend. I mean, I would have to hang out with you like all the
At
time.
my age, it would be a little questionable, I think. It's just,
That's what makes it so interesting. All right, so I want to talk about how you got involved with James Brown. And all you Prince fans, come down. We're gonna do Prince questions. Just hold on a second. But have you seen the movie? I'm sure you have. You saw the movie Get On Up?
Yeah, of course.
So one of the things that's in there, surprisingly enough, you weren't in the movie. However, there is a section of the movie where James is talking about how exactly the DJs and stuff get paid and stuff as far as you utilizing them to promote shows. Here's a little clip for those who may not be familiar with what I'm talking about.
We go to the young cats, the hungry cats, the late night cats. The 20-year-old white DJ from Richmond, Virginia, who ain't getting paid nothing. He only doing it because he loves the music. We go to him and we ask him if he want to be the sole James Brown promoter for the Richmond show for a percentage. He gonna say,
are you kidding me? Do you know how much they pay me?
Between nothing and $50 a week. But he love my music. Oh, he dig himself some James Brown. And he got a microphone and a turntable and 4 hours of airtime to kids.
Screw payola.
See?
This is Alan Leeds coming back at you. Now with his new hit, Papa's got a brand new bag. It's James Brown.
And at the end, he gonna say,
And make sure you catch James Brown at the arena in Richmond this Tuesday.
I see, because he's young, he's 20. And he got strong legs, and he know everybody. He know the cat at the pool hall. He know the cat at the barber shop.
So exactly, and I just wanted to play that clip. I don't know if you probably saw that clip or not, but or remember it.
Yeah, I saw the clip.
And I didn't realize.
Where did they get that guy? Why couldn't I be at casting? Why did they pick that guy?
Yeah, I don't know. It's that was kind of interesting. Yeah, but obviously they utilized you during your DJ portion of this, and that was kind of a little bit unusual, because I think I've heard you tell the story before that, you had an opportunity to kind of promote an event for James, and you did such an amazing deal that he brought you on So I don't, how they utilized you in that, I guess, is not really accurate, but is that really how it worked out back in those days? As far as, was James one of the first people to actually do that that plan as
Yeah,
far as?
I think so. And quite honestly, it pretty much is accurate. Because in my radio days, we did, myself and another couple of young disc jockeys did actually promote some club shows with you know, Otis Redding, the Drifters, the Curtis Mayfield, the Impressions. We'd bring them to town and put them in a couple of clubs, one club on Friday and one on Saturday, and make a little money. With James, I didn't promote one of his shows until 1969, and from that was an arena show in Pittsburgh, and it came close to selling out, and he was impressed, and that's what led to going to work for him. So I mean, you know, the film stops there. It doesn't explain that it led from disc jockey to promoter to an employee of the artist, but that wasn't necessary for the film. It made a point, and yeah, it was true. James used disc jockeys in most major cities as frontmen for his concerts. Mm-hmm. And it made a lot of sense, because if you got the disc jockey in your pocket, then he's going to play your records. And he's going to play Bobby Bird's records. And he's going to play the JBs and Martha Whitney and Vicki Anderson. He's going to play every damn record you send him, because he's getting paid at the gig. Now, you know, is it payola? Yeah, it is and it isn't. If the advertisements on the radio are paid for, then it's not payola. But if the guy is just rambling on constantly about the show, and it's not a paid advertisement, and he's just riffing, well, then he could get in trouble. But, you know, nobody was clocking that shit back then. Nobody.
Right. Yeah.
And the disc jockeys, particularly at urban radio stations at that particular time, were woefully underpaid. And the station owners knew that they were going to use that voice, that presence in the community, for other hustles. And those hustles, the easiest hustle was to front shows. So, yeah.
Well, and I got to tell you, I mean, there's like, you know, I'm going to ask you a few more questions about James, but then we'll move on to, you know, some of the Prince questions as well. But while I'm going to take the big screen here, because I did actually go ahead as part of the research here. I did purchase this amazing book, There Was a Time, James Brown, the Chitlin Circuit, and Me, that is out right now on Amazon. I will actually put up the Amazon link for you guys to actually purchase it. Show your respect to this amazing man right here and this book. And I can only imagine, unfortunately, it just came to me a couple of days ago, so I was busy listening to interviews. I didn't get a chance to read this amazing book, but
well, that's the same shit that's in the book. I only got so much to say.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really cool, because you also worked with Questlove on the, you know, he did the forward on this, and man, I definitely, if you guys want to hear some more great stories about James Brown, this book is available right now on Amazon. I just put the link up there for you so you guys can pick it up.
Well, at the risk of trying to sound like a commercial for the book, yes, it's about James Brown, but the real thing that inspired me to do the book was I wanted to capture the flavor of what the business was like back in the 60s and early 70s, before the touring business became corporatized, when it really was a hustle. The money wasn't huge. And I mean, James did better than most, obviously. He wasn't a poor man. He did quite well. But I mean, it wasn't like today where you're grossing millions of dollars every week. If we had a night where the gross was $75,000, we were ecstatic, and maybe we'd walk with half of that. And it was a mom and pop business. And so I wanted a book that could kind of capture the flavor of what that whole existence was like on the road back then. The immediate post-civil rights era, where legally integration was in, and supposedly hotels and public facilities were now totally integrated by law, but there were still cities, particularly down south, where they didn't practice it and resisted it. And, just really paint a picture of that whole genre. And so James Brown, in my experience, are just kind of like, there've been other books that have talked about the Chitlin Circuit in those days, but they're very seldom written by somebody who was there. And since most everybody who was there with me are either dead or senile, I figured before I'm one or the other, I better write this shit. I just want kids to be able to go to the library 20 years from now and get a sense of what it was like, because it was so radically different than what the business is today.
I mean, and you always talked about, just talking about how different the business is. And when you first came in, you admittedly didn't know a whole bunch. I mean, you even mentioned you were always learning on the fly,
right?
And that happened when you started working with James. And what was probably, you're kind of getting advice on the go, and probably a lot directly from him. What is the best piece of advice that you ever received, not necessarily from him, but maybe from anyone that you've worked with, that proved to be invaluable information that undoubtedly helped you do your job better across the board?
That's a great question. I wish I had a good answer.
There's always like something that somebody says. It's just like, this is a weird example, but like, I shouldn't be the focal point of this. One time I went to go hear Zig Ziglar, and he was doing the sales event. And he said, you ever go on vacation, and right when you're about to go on vacation, that day that is the last day in the office before your vacation, the amount of work that you get done in that day is just unreal, because you're up against the clock. He said, if you applied that same energy, that same volume of effort into every single day, he said, you would be an expert. You'd be dead. You would be an expert and you'd be like one of the top professionals in whatever industry it is.
No, that's a good point. I think of it, to me, you just described Fridays. That was my thing. In any office I worked in, whether it was Paisley Park or James Brown Productions or any other jobs I had, it was always Fridays was the panic. Okay, got to get this done. Got to get this done. Got to get this done. So that's very true. I'm really hard pressed to think of a specific answer to your question. It's a damn good question. I'm not sure anybody's ever asked me that. And I feel guilty for not having an answer, because there were certainly so many people who taught me things and showed me the ropes. People that I have gratitude for, and I could sit here and name them, but I can't remember the specific thing.
Well, and one of the other things that I heard, because we'll move on to another question, because I'll let you it's probably going to be stirring in the back of your mind.
I'll think of it tonight.
I'm sure.
Laying in bed, I'll wake up at 2 a.m. Aha.
Right. Now, you had mentioned, some of a lot of the bands that are, back in the 50s and 60s and even in some cases the 70s, especially a lot of the R&B acts. One of the things I learned listening to some of the past talks that you've done was that a lot of these big bands did not have bands. Like, say like a Little Richard would not have his own band. It would be Little Richard, and then you would work with whatever band it was that you went in to that town. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned that, a lot of them, and there were many of them were like that. You would go into a town, and then whatever the house band was for whatever that venue was, that's who you worked with. And I was not aware of that. I always thought that these big name bands always had their own thing. Can you talk about that a little bit and that experience of, because the second part to this question is that you mentioned that, some of the bands in the venues down south, most of them didn't read music. They just kind of played by ear. They kind of did their own things. But a lot of the bands that were up north, they required you to bring sheet music. And if you didn't have them, you said you got your feelings hurt. Mm-hmm. So can you kind of speak to that whole process a little bit? And also, was there a time where you guys went into a town, say with James or Prince or anybody, and did get your feelings hurt?
Not really. Of course, James and Prince were always had their own bands.
They had their own bands, right?
Always, they were always self-contained. But you're right. If you indulge me to go back to the '60s, and I'll talk about some artists that a lot of your viewers may or may not be familiar with. But the goal in the soul music era for an artist was first get a hit record in order to get on the road, to get booked. And you'd probably be an opening act on a tour with a major artist. Like you might be, like maybe James Brown would hire you for a month as an opening act to travel on his show. Then you'd hope to get a couple of more hit records to the point where promoters and club owners were anxious to book you. Then at that point, maybe you could afford to hire a guitar player. That was usually what came first, was a guitar player who would be the music director. And you would get to a town, the guitar player would meet with whatever band the promoter had provided to back you up that night. Now, mind you, if you got a local band and you know you're going to back up Wilson Pickett on Saturday night, you spend the week rehearsing his songs. You go out and get his records and you learn his songs. Once you had a guitar player, then at least you had somebody who was musically capable of leading this band and hopefully salvaging something out of it. Because sometimes these bands were really good and sometimes they were not so good. Sometimes they didn't care enough to really learn the songs. And they did a half-assed job of learning the songs. Then, if you were successful enough, let me illustrate it a better way, so I don't just ramble on.
No, that's fine.
Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions started out as a 5-member vocal group. Yes. Then it became a 3-member vocal group. It was Curtis, who sang lead and played guitar, and two other singers, Sam Gooden and Fred Cash. Those were the Impressions when they made their biggest hit records. People Get Ready, Keep on Pushing, It's All Right. All those big records they had in the 60s that probably none of the viewers tonight ever heard of. But at any rate, they were huge records.
We can sing some bars for.
There you go. And I know you guys would know.
Go ahead.
That's good. I'll stop. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Can you do Wilson Pickett? Because I'm going to talk about him too. The first time I saw the Impressions, it was just them and Curtis. And there was a house band that backed them and did a fairly decent job. And, you know, it was like, okay, cool. The next time I saw them, they had a bass player and a drummer. So now you mean with their own musicians, now they can start to play around with what we used to call taking the songs and making a show of it. You can start rearranging some of the songs, extending them so that there's sing-alongs with the audience, you know, different gimmicks to make the songs come alive so they're more than just that 3-minute 45 that people were buying. And then the goal would be is hopefully to become successful enough that you could afford to have a full band. And eventually the Impressions did. So that was kind of like how the stepping stones. And it would, you know, and mind you, this is the age where it's all about singles. It's not about albums. It's all about singles. People didn't buy albums hardly. And if they did, the albums were just a collection of the group's old singles. So it's your whole career depended on your latest single. And if you're a major artist in the soul era, Solomon Burke, Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, et cetera, you released a new 45 basically every 3 months. The only one who did it more often was James Brown because he just threw records out constantly. But the whole idea was to become successful enough to afford a band. But the point being is that the economy of the soul music circuit was that it took more than 1 or 2 hits to reach the point where you could earn enough money to support bringing a band on the road. So until you reach that point, assuming you did reach that point, you were stuck with doing these gigs where the artists would come in town and have no idea who's going to back them up, and go to a rehearsal the day of the show and just hope for the best. And, you know, I saw some shows that were disasters because the artist got in late, the flight was delayed, they didn't have a rehearsal. And, you know, I remember a show I was emceeing at a club in Richmond in the 60s, and it was the Drifters, who had a string of huge hits, Under the Boardwalk, on Broadway, Up on the Roof. These were huge hit songs. And this was a group of 4 singers with a guitar player. And we had a local band to back them up that had pretty much learned their songs, but not really. And Abdul Samad, who was their guitar player, was a friend of mine. I remember standing on the side of the stage, and he was literally calling out chord changes to the band as the show went on. The group's up front singing their hearts out, and he's in the back hollering out chord changes just so the band could at least try to keep up. And, you know, it was a mom and pop business.
Yeah.
Now, you say, well, how in the world did you get away with that? Well, understand, too, that back in those days, the PA systems weren't what they are today. They didn't put microphones on the drums. You know, it was all acoustic. I mean, there were mics for the singers, obviously, and there might be a mic or two for the horns if there's horn players in the band. But the guitar player and the bass player crank their amps up to 10. And I'm talking about James Brown in an arena. The guitar players and the bass players crank their amps. The drummers are playing as hard as they can, like they're trying to kill somebody. And you sometimes can hear the horns. Even though they're mic'd, it might be low in the mix. So it's not like the audiences were accustomed to hearing really good audio at venues. Nobody had ever heard a show sound like they sound today.
Right. Yeah.
And soul music was a singer's art. It was all about the singer.
Right.
Just by definition, that's what that genre was about. So if the singers sounded good, if you could hear the singers and they sounded good, sounded like the record, you know, then they'd get over it. They'd win.
Yeah.
And the band might sound like shit, but the audience would kind of play past that as long as the singers killed.
Okay. Well, I like that you're bringing up that genre, that era, should I say, because a couple of weeks ago we had the Soul Sisters, the original Piperettes. We had Brenda Lee Eager and Patty Henley.
Wow.
And they both performed. They performed in New York, and they were called last minute to come play with James. So, of course, they're all excited. And then they came to the realization they didn't know James's music as far as the background vocals had gone.
They said they were shopping. They said we were out shopping, and somebody called and said, can you come sing for James? And they were like, oh, we're excited. And they got in the cab driving to the show at, I guess it probably was at the Apollo. And they were just like, well, we don't know any James songs, or we don't know the vocal parts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. How does that responsibility fall? Is that something when you're looking for, finding those last minute people? Is that something that
that's a good question, but quite honestly, that's a kind of a weird story for me because he always carried singers and musicians. I mean, he was fully contained. He had a lot of people on the road. I mean, he'd have a 15-piece band and 3 background singers and opening acts that were on salary in-house, a comedian,
I can't. I don't remember the time
for him to reach out like that is kind of unusual, and I wonder what era that was when that actually happened.
It was in 60. It was like 60. They were working with Reverend Jesse Jackson
with Operation Breadbasket and
for the Operation Breadbasket.
Okay, so that would have been later. That would have been early 70s.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that was around the period of time that they were, and I don't know what the scenario was, whether or not they were short a couple of singers, but it was just a funny story because I could imagine the excitement in those.
No, that's possible because James was impulsive, and he might be like opening at the Apollo and thinking to himself like, okay, I played here last year. What am I going to do that's different? And you know what? It would be at the last minute decided it would really be cool to have some female backup singers. And, whoever was his road manager at the time probably had to make a call and figure out who to call. And, so that's feasible.
Yeah, let me I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit here, Jeff, because we saw, obviously in a lot of the stories that we hear told about James Brown and obviously the way the movies portray him, there's the truth is somewhere in the middle. But we saw like a lot of different things, like whenever he would dock the band for missing a note, he had those hand signals that he would do.
Sure.
That would dock a show or whatever. And I can only imagine that a lot of that stuff kind of created a lot of heated moments and maybe some onstage frustrations that maybe kind of spilled over after the show. Were there ever any altercations or really heated moments that stand out in your memory that happened in the middle of a show where you're like, oh, as a tour manager, like, I gotta get this together. I got to control this situation before it gets out of hand.
I can't think of anything that got out of hand, but there was always drama because quite honestly, he likes stirring up drama. Seriously. And, I'm not a shrink, so I won't sit here and try to analyze why, but he did. He liked playing people against each other. And maybe it was like that's how he thought he would retain loyalty, because you got to understand, James Brown was a very complicated man. He did not believe in trusting people. He couldn't. And I suppose that comes here again. I'll be an amateur shrink. You're born in the Jim Crow South in the what was he born in the 30s. And you're a kid in the 1940s in Georgia, of all places, one of the worst of the states when it came to race relations, and let's put it more bluntly, when it came to being safe as a young black man in the streets of Augusta, Georgia. And he came up without any real parental supervision. His mother left when he was 6. His father was in and out of his life. And, you could almost say he was orphaned. And he drops out of school in the 6th grade to run a shoe shine stand and hustle and whatever he could do. Ends up going to reform school. And he's sitting there in this era, and this is before the Civil Rights Bill, and he's sitting there saying, how in the world am I going to get out of Jim Crow, Georgia, and make something of myself? And, when you come from that kind of background where you can't trust your own parents, it kind of teaches you at a very early age not to trust human beings. And I don't think he ever did trust anybody. Now, he would trust you for a minute and you'd be in his good graces. But then he would sit there and think about, oh, I'm showing him too much trust. He's going to take advantage. He's going to rip me off. And he was always worried that any of us who had access to the box office at the venues, he was always worried about whether or not any of us would be dipping our fingers in the till. And as a result, he would accuse you of it, even if you didn't do it, just to keep you on your toes. In other words, like, you better not steal from me because I'm going to catch you. It's that kind of thing. And that's the kind of paranoia that comes from a background where you literally couldn't trust anybody. Strangely enough, Prince was very much like that, but that's a whole other story. He too had trust issues.
Yeah, he was very protective over not just the money part of it, but also for just protecting his.
Yeah. Well, no, and even with James, it wasn't just the money. It was like you didn't dare look at his girlfriends too closely. Because if you Miss Leeds, you got your eyes on her.
Yes.
You better not do that. Don't make a fool of yourself, Miss Leeds. Don't be trying to talk to her up. You ain't ready for her. You ain't ready for the likes of her. Only I can handle her. Like that.
Robinson.
So with a person like that, there was bound to be drama.
Yeah.
And then you got, we had dancing girls. We had a troupe of 5. Well, this was before I worked for him, but I knew them then. He had 5 dancing girls called the Twisting Parkettes, who were on stage, you know, shaking their booties and doing whatever you did back in the 60s. It was pretty tame compared to today. But I mean, there was no Nicki Minaj, but it was, you know, it was some sexy stuff. And
Right.
his idea was, let's have something for everybody. So we'll have some girls for the guys to look at. And, you know, now, mind you, all these people are on a bus together after the show, going to the next town. So you got 5 girls, you got backup singers, male and female. You got all these young guys in the band whose wives and girlfriends are at home, and they're getting frustrated, to use the word lightly. So shit was bound to happen. And I mean, I was actually talking to somebody just very recently about Maceo Parker, who ended up marrying one of those dancers. She sadly passed away not too long ago, Bunny. But Bernard Odom, the bass player, married one of the dancers. Nat Kendrick, who was one of his early drummers, married one of the dancers. So, you know, you had all of this going on. And naturally, if you got a band of 10, 12, 15 musicians and you only got 5 dancers, then, you know, only 5 guys are going to be happy at best. So there's drama. There's always drama. And then you had the fact that James always had his eyes on all the girls that worked on the show. And I always think of this, and I don't know who to attribute this quote to. It's a quote that's been passed on through books and interviews and so on. So I don't know whose quote it was, but it's the old adage with Ray Charles and his Raylettes. His Raylettes were his backup singers, female backup singers. And the joke was, if you want to be a Raylette, first you got to let Ray. Well, and it wasn't too much different with the James Brown show. I'm not saying every woman on the road with James Brown slept with him, because everyone didn't, but a remarkable percentage of them did at some point. And they usually knew each other had slept with him. So now you got these girls on the bus looking at each other with darts in their eyes, you know, or competing to see who's going to stay with him tomorrow night. I mean, it's, you know, it's like show business is fantastic. A lot of it changes, but some of it never does. I end up on the Purple Rain tour, and who's on the bus with Prince? Vanity, Jill Jones, Susan Moonsey. You know, it's like,
well, lots of drama there.
Then Sheila E. shows up, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, the harem grows. And it was, you know, drama.
For those of you just joining us, we are joined by the amazing Alan Leeds, who has served in some management capacity with a wide variety of artists: James Brown, Prince. We're talking about James Brown right now. Prince, Cameo, D'Angelo, Raphael Sadiq, Maxwell. The list just goes on and on and on. And Jeff, I'm sorry, I interrupted. You were about to ask a question. Sorry,
no, I think I was.
It was probably interrupted. That's all good.
Yeah, that's all good.
Don't forget there was a band in Pittsburgh called Taking Names that my brother ran.
That's right.
And I managed them too. So put them on the list.
Yeah.
You take a name.
Speaking of which, there's no better time.
Yes.
To say that this CD by Eric and Paul Peterson, with guest appearances by Brian Lynch, a remarkable trumpet player, Mike Stern, who played guitar with Miles Davis,
Questlove,
and the ubiquitous Questlove. This CD is now officially released, and if you go on Eric's Facebook page, or I think there's a Facebook page for the CD. I don't know how the hell they sell CDs in this day and age. I used to go to record stores. I don't know how this works, but somehow it's officially released, and it really, even if my brother wasn't on it, I would like it. It's a terrific CD of some remarkable jazz. Some of it's kind of fusiony, some of it's, you know, very contemporary. But this is a band. They call it LP, Leeds Peterson, and they actually opened for D'Angelo at First Avenue several years ago.
I did not know that.
D'Angelo was late, and the crowd was getting restless. Place was maxed out. I mean, there were people on top of people, and D'Angelo had a problem with weather coming out of Chicago on his flight. and we had to ask Eric and Paul to extend their set. And Questlove sat in with them that night. He happened to be in town. He was going to DJ. So that was the show. It was LP Music opening up, D'Angelo, and then Questlove would DJ. And anyway, we had to ask Paul and Eric to just ad lib and kill some time until D got there. And they killed. I mean, this is a D'Angelo audience. They didn't pay to see LP Music. It's a D'Angelo audience. And this band absolutely tore the club up. So it frustrates me to no end how difficult it is for them to find an audience in this modern music business where jazz is kind of cast aside to jazz clubs where old people go. And, you know, you have the exceptions, of course, are Kamasi Washington, who's had remarkable success, deservedly so, and a handful of others. But it's like, if you can kill a D'Angelo crowd that's restless waiting for D'Angelo and absolutely tear the place up, then you must be onto something. Anyway, that's the music on this record. So go get it.
And it is fantastic. And you're right. You did bring up, you know, there's so many struggling artists that kind of fall in that scope. Esperanza Spalding, you mentioned Kamasi, Robert Glasper, all these guys that, you know, are just phenomenal artists that, and I think the problem is, and I had this way in like the basic section. Yes, we're going to talk about Prince stuff. Calm down. In the basic section, I'd mentioned that radio has just become very, very disposable. It's like the songs that you hear on the radio now, next year, you're not going to hear them at all. It's very, very few and far between. It's like, it's this generational thing where people are taking in music and then they're just disposing of it. It's like listening to it, okay, and next, and okay. And I don't know if that was really kind of something that's happened with Spotify, it's happened with Pandora, or the way that they kind of just churn out music. Like literally every single day, there are at least a few dozen brand new albums or new releases that happen, to the point where Spotify actually has a thing where if you're a Spotify member, they curate a brand new list of like tons of music that you probably would like, that is catered to what you listen to every single week.
Yeah.
And it's how you would get found as an artist nowadays is just you have to be doing something just insane.
Yeah, it's
to stand out.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It is very challenging and frustrating because
Jeff will tell you. He's a struggling artist. I mean, he's really good, and it's just like.
No, I think there's probably more good music out there today than there's ever been. And the technology is a blessing and a curse, because the technology has allowed a situation where, number one, you don't need to buy thousands of dollars worth of equipment. You just need a computer. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but nonetheless, how many records are made that way? And if you got Pro Tools, which is expensive, but if you got that, you can make the record in your bedroom. You know, you don't even have to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And thanks to not just Spotify, but just social media in general, you no longer have to get. I mean, in the old days, if you're going to make a record, nobody even knew how to do it unless you were signed to a label who could afford to hire a studio and put you in there with some musicians and make some music.
Right.
You don't have to go through that anymore. Right. You can just make it and put it out there. Problem is, now it's out there, but what's there? What is there?
Right.
What is the definition of out there? Is it just in infinity somewhere? You know, and how are people going to find it? And I think we're still too much. I mean, there are exceptions, I get that, but we're too much stuck with categories. The thing about Spotify and all of them curating playlists is they're telling you what you're going to like.
Right.
They don't know what I'm going to like.
Exactly.
I didn't like reggae until about 15 years ago. I went through my whole life ignoring reggae.
Yeah.
And then one day I was sitting with somebody who happened to be playing a Bob Marley record. And I just sat there, and it was an aha moment. I'm like, holy shit, how did I miss this?
Right.
And I went out and bought every Bob Marley record in the world, and the dub versions and whatever else. And Spotify would have never put Bob Marley on my list. So, and particularly when it comes to jazz, because that's become such a scary word to young people, because it just suddenly, it means jazz clubs where old people go. And they might be young musicians, but they're playing old people's music for old audiences. And it's bullshit. It's totally bullshit.
Entirely.
There are people, and yes, there have been exceptions. I mean, there are jazz, when you hear D'Angelo live, it's damn near like there's a very jazz mentality in the band.
Right.
Listening to Pino and Chris Dave just as a bass player drummer combination. I used to love those tours because I would just sit there and listen to them every night because they did shit different. Mm-hmm. They were constantly challenging each other. That's what jazz is. And many of the audience weren't paying close attention to that. They're to see and hear D'Angelo. I get that. But it was an additional element to the music that maybe you'd hear that, and maybe that would inspire you to go out and check out some jazz. Maybe that would inspire you to get a Kamasi Washington CD or go to one of his gigs and hear something that you never dreamt before. But how many more Kamasi Washingtons are there? Chris Dave, the drummer, has drum heads. Very innovative. He's got several albums up on Bandcamp. Yeah. He did one for Blue Note Records. I think he got dropped. I'm not sure, because all of a sudden there's these other records on Bandcamp. They're tremendous, and they're in the same vogue as some of the Robert Glasper stuff.
Yeah, Jeff and I have seen plenty of artists that have struggled and came up out of Atlanta. Van Hunt is a good friend of mine.
Yeah, perfect example.
Van Hunt was like, and when he was picked up by Blue Note, he had an amazing album that they shelved, which really screwed up his whole creative process. It was kind of like having your Sign of the Times album shelved. Right. Because he had an album called The Popular Machine that just like they sat on it forever. And it finally got released, I guess, years ago, but it was too late. They're already done its damage.
Right. Missed its moment. Right. Missed its moment.
You know, these artists that are just such phenomenal artists, and they're just, well, it's a shame.
A lot of the difficulty is because, just like you said, Spotify's giving you your playlist. They're trying to tell us. So what we've lost is people influencing people right. Showing people what music is good. Instead, we're separating everyone, and you're becoming so individual. You think you're becoming an individualist, but what you're doing is you're missing out because you don't have anyone to help point and steer you. Like when Eric was on the show, he was talking about his music and the things he does, and you know his records out. Both of you have very different musical tastes. Both of you love jazz. He does a whole different level, but he mentioned one thing, and I think that's the most important thing, is he got his influence of music from you. There was music that you were always playing and hearing that he was learning to hear. So my question is, how much of that was intentional? You know, like, was it important?
There was a point where it became intentional. I mean, at first it was just the fact that I was 5 years older and I had a bunch of records that I liked to play because I liked them. And older brothers, I don't know if either of you have younger brothers, but older brothers have a habit of insisting that their younger brothers like what they like. So it's kind of like you force feed them. It's like, hey, I'm a Brooklyn Dodger fan. Damn it, you're going to be a Brooklyn Dodger fan. You're going to be my little brother, and I'm going to watch your back. Then you got to subscribe to whatever I'm into. So I suppose there was a little element of that, but I think he developed his own taste pretty early on.
He's a hardcore jazz fan. Hardcore.
Yeah, but so am I. But and actually, I want to correct you a little bit because our tastes overlap a lot.
Well, now what's interesting is that
he's when it comes to jazz, he's a little more open-minded for the outside stuff. Now I'm a little more traditional.
he did say, I know we're going to talk about how you brought him on board with Prince when you started working with Prince, but you were a fan of Prince, after seeing him live and after kind of seeing him, you were a fan of Prince, and Eric admittedly on the show said, I did not like his stuff at all.
He's still not a fan of Prince.
It's like,
I mean, he's a fan of the person, Prince Rogers Nelson, but I don't think he was ever a fan of Prince's music. I don't mean he disliked it. Eric, the way he presents himself sometimes is so assertive with his opinions. We're a couple of old Jews. That's what we do. What else? You ever watch Larry David show? We're old Jews who have opinions, and we want to share them with the world.
Yeah. So, well, it was funny because he had a lot of that. I mean, of course, when he had his leeway to work with the Flesh, and he had a little bit of leeway with the Madhouse project.
Listen, Eric has more gratitude for the opportunities that Prince gave him than you could ever imagine. And he expresses that to me and others whenever it's appropriate. He fully understands the opportunities Prince provided him, the exposure he provided him, and adores him for that and feels honored as much as he's going to feel honored. I mean, I'm sure there's a part of him that as a brilliant musician, there's part of him that probably thinks to himself, well, if it wasn't for Prince, I would have found another way. I would have made it anyway. I mean, he was a professional musician before Prince.
Right.
But, I think, and I'm uncomfortable speaking for him, but I think the main thing with Eric and Prince is that Eric just doesn't want to be defined by Prince.
Right.
He doesn't want his tombstone to say Eric Leeds played with Prince.
Right.
He's done more than that.
Tons more.
And he's done a lot of other things that are equally worthy, maybe not as successful in terms of exposure, but I mean, it's hard to match being on international tours and stadiums, but by the same token, it doesn't mean the music was any less worthy if you're playing in a club. And I think that he has seen, and now I'm speaking for myself, there have been quite a few people who have come through Prince's world that have willingly allowed themselves to be defined by Prince. They may not think so if you ask them that. They may not even be conscious of it. And I don't want to mention names and get in trouble because some of them are people that I love very much. But you go on the road with Prince for 5 years and you have a long, long, long career. And I say, okay, where's your body of work? What else have you done?
Yeah.
And if the only answer is Prince, then it's like, I'm not sure what that says about you as a musician, that you either didn't have the talent or you didn't have the curiosity or the creativity to do something equally worthy on your own or with other collaborators. Maybe it means you go on the road with Michael Jackson next or Janet Jackson or this one or that one. But where's your body of work? What do you stand for when it's all said and done? And I think that what a lot of people misunderstand about Eric is that's his issue. It's like Prince was great, a great boss, gave me amazing opportunities. I'm forever in his debt for that. Love the guy for what, had a good relationship more times than not. It was fascinating. I learned, he learned things from me working in the studio. I'm sure he'd be the first to admit. And he brought something to Prince that Prince didn't have before. But by the same token, it's like he's done a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
So, and I kind of feel the same way too. And sometimes a little reluctant to do Prince-related interviews. Simply because it's like, I don't want to be known as, oh, that's the guy who worked for Prince. It's like, no, I worked for all those other people. And guess what? all any of them ever were my employer.
Yeah, I mean, because we've been talking an excessive amount of time already, and we haven't really kind of, I mean, Prince has kind of entered in here and there, but we've been talking about all these phenomenal acts that you've been working with.
And I appreciate that. And I didn't mean that comment.
No, I know that.
That wasn't directed at you guys or this or
I understand
this broadcast.
No, and I heard that. That's one of the things that I heard. I mentioned I heard that in the previous interviews you'd done. It was like, okay, what about Cameo? What about Kiss? We had some other people that were saying Kiss. Well, what happened with Kiss?
Right.
Well, the thing that occurs to me, I guess maybe because I'm, quasi-retired and certainly retired from the road, it really gets to the point, and this is maybe not that important for the point of this interview, this conversation we're having, which is a lot of fun, because you guys know your shit. But, there's a point where you say, you know what? All of that was in my past. Every one of those artists was worthy. Every one of them paid me on time. But guess what? It's like, if you want to talk to me about my life now, let's talk about my wife and son. You know what I mean? Because that's what goes on my tombstone. Is he was married to Gwen and had a son named Tristan, and his parents were Herbert and Dorothy. That's who I am.
That's who you are.
I'm not Prince's guy or James Brown's guy. What I did have was a remarkable string of luck that I was able to have a 49, almost 50-year career, basically getting paid for a hobby. I loved music. I wanted to be around it. I was fascinated by the people who created it. I wanted to be around them and watch them work and try to understand how they did what they did and understand the music they made and fucking listen to it every night.
Yeah.
There's not a record in the world I would rather listen to than live music. That's just me. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get paid to do that shit. From the day I became a radio disc jockey, I'm like, the radio station's they didn't pay much, but you're going to pay me to play the same records I'd be sitting home playing?
Right.
Get the fuck out of here. This is good. Okay. And go on the road and listen to James Brown with Bootsy in the band every night. Go on the road with D'Angelo and hear that shit every night. Go on the road with Prince with his various bands and hear that shit every night and get paid to be there.
Yeah.
Who does that? So
life goals.
So that's not who I am. It's what I did. And who I am goes back to Glenn and Tristan and my brother. And, we're a small family. And, that's who I am. So
speaking of which,
the problem with fans and interviews and so on is that too many times they're trying to identify with anybody who had anything to do with Prince.
Right.
The hairdresser writes a book. The photographer's do a book. Now, some of these are great books. Don't misunderstand me.
Yeah.
But this fascination with any of us who had anything to do with Prince, and it's like, yo, dude, get a life. Yeah. Listen to the music, love the music. And, once a year read an interview. Okay, cool. But it's like, really?
Yeah, Jeff and I talk about this a lot. Whereas, like, the name of the website is Funkatopia.
Funkatopia, not
it's not Princetopia.
Right, of course.
But see what, and you probably don't know some of the backstory of this, but one of the reasons why Funkatopia is as large as it is right now is primarily because of Prince and because before he passed away, I mean, starting in about 2004, 2005. He started regularly talking about the website. Anytime that we posted something about him, he would put it on his Twitter account and his Facebook, which was weird because I was the only sole person. I was kind of like you. I was running my own thing. And then it just started becoming a regular habitual thing. And he started sending a lot of his artists my way. Liv Warfield, Shelby J, all those people would be coming on a regular basis to do, he would let them do interviews and talk about it. And and it was one of the last tweets that he did before he died was to post about Funkatopia. And I was just like, I was just surprising that I was even on his radar. So, and I know a lot of the fans kind of come in as a result of that. And
it's cred.
And so we catered to that. But this is one of the reasons why I really was excited to have you on the show, because while there are Prince stories that we can use to cater to these people, there are so many stories that I want to hear from you about things other than Prince. And speaking of which, I mean, before we get off the subject, is Tristan following in your footsteps?
Not really. He's a hippie, and he's living in Vermont, and which he loves and he hates. He loves the sanctity of it.
Yeah.
Being off the beaten path in a safe situation, and just, in a community where you can leave your door open and walk the streets at night. And if the police come by, they wave hello and they know your name instead of trying to beat you up. He loves that part of it. But by the same token, I think he misses the fast track. So he's kind of wrestling with, okay, how long am I going to stay here and where am I going to go? He's very much into photography and film. Not yet on a professional level, but I have a sense at some point he may try to jump in that boat. He did do a couple of tours just so that we could be together on a couple of occasions. He came on the road. He knew D'Angelo. He and D'Angelo actually are the same age. And he'd known Dee for probably since the Voodoo tour. And so on one of our European tours in the mid-2000 teens, 2015, 14, I forget what year, he jumped on the crew and worked as a stagehand and assistant on the crew, so we could be on the road together in Europe. And that was the best tour I ever had, just because he and I were together.
Wow. D'Angelo is amazing. And one of the stories, it's one of the random questions that I had. You obviously were in this profession before cell phones. So people had phones and people had, pagers eventually came into the mix as well. And
can I stop? I'm sorry, Christopher. Can I stop you for just a second?
Sure.
I want to add to this. Tristan is my Spotify. He sends me links.
My daughter is my Spotify.
And of music, and it could be anything. It could be something that's Nigerian. It could be Latin. His girlfriend is Puerto Rican. And so he hears Latin music. He's a child of hip hop. I mean, he grew up with hip hop. He's that generation. So he's like a textbook of hip hop history. And I mean, he sends me links to stuff that I would never find on my own, and have ended up going out buying CDs and checking out stuff. And it's usually very obscure stuff. And I love him for that. So he's my Spotify, and it is genre and cliche free. There's no genre is off limits, and nothing cliche-ish.
That's amazing.
Anyway, you were saying, I'm sorry.
No, my 19-year-old daughter is the same way. My 19-year-old daughter, Jolie, she's my Spotify, because she listens to, she likes to go down those rabbit holes. She doesn't like to really pay attention to too much stuff on the radio. Like we do have a kindred spirit in one artist that's on the radio right now, which is Billie Eilish. Just because of the production stuff that her brother Phineas does is just unlike anything I've ever heard before. I wish she would do more with her voice, but on the same note, she just has this really kind of engaging tone, but the production and the music is just like, wow, it's just so fantastic. So yeah, she's the same way. She's my Spotify. But to get back to the question, what I was going to say was that a lot of these artists that you've worked with, this laundry list of artists that you've worked with, would call you at many hours of the night and leave messages on your answering machine. And I heard that you actually maintain recordings. You've somehow managed to keep some of these recordings of from some of these artists, and I was hoping that you would be able to share some of your favorites that you.
See, I can't. I shouldn't agree with that because nobody will call me anymore.
Yeah, but they don't leave. His answering service is a little bit different now.
But I think the best one is Amir Questlove, because once when he was here, I played him. I assembled years ago. I assembled them all on a cassette, and it was it's mom and pop. I would just copy them off the phone machine, put a microphone to the speaker of the phone machine, so the fidelity is like whack, but
right, yeah.
You can hear who it is. And there's James Brown, and there's Prince, and a handful of other people. But I played it for Amir. And he was fascinated. He's like, "Oh my God, this is so crazy!" And it's like, it's just little stuff. It was, James Brown calling me to come down to a hotel to see him one night, and he left like 3 or 4 messages in a row over a period of about 15 minutes while Gwen and I were out to dinner. And I came in, and each message's voice is a little louder, and the last one is like, "You rap? I know you're there, son. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. It's a Godfather. Pick up the phone." I mean, it's hysterical. And then there's Prince, who never, ever had any political niceties when he would call. Gwen might answer the phone. Is Alan there? Not mind you, he knows Gwen. She's house sat for him.
Right.
She's done his laundry. You know what I mean? It's like,
wait,
this is not a stranger.
Wait, your wife did Prince's laundry?
Well, I'm exaggerating, but
I mean,
she did house sit.
She did house sit.
Yeah, a couple of times before
Paisley Park or some other location.
No, the old Purple House.
Oh, okay.
The one that he ended up giving to his dad. In fact, she has a great story of how there were some fans outside the gate, and the gate was maybe 50 yards from the house on the street. The house was maybe 50 yards back, and she was house sitting, and she would actually take our laundry and go do it there, so she'd have something to do. That's where the laundry came from. But at any rate, so there's 3. She noticed 3 or 4 fans, what she assumed were fans, out by the gate, and they were just looking at the Purple House. So she's curious. So she puts on there's an intercom where you can, talk to whoever's at the gate. She puts the speaker on to see what they're saying, but she hits the wrong button and opens the gate.
Oh, no.
So they start cautiously looking around, looking over their shoulder. Is it safe? Is it safe? Because they don't see a human being, and they start walking through the gate. And she's like, "Oh my God, what have I done? If he ever finds out, he'll freak out. He'll fire me. He'll fire Alan." It's like the worst thing that ever happened is they're on the grounds, right? And this is in the 80s. It's like post Purple Rain.
Oh no.
Give or take a year. And she's like freaking out, and she can't figure out how to close the gate, but it doesn't matter because they're in now. So she's, girlfriend's from New Jersey. She knows how to hang. So she's like, "Okay, I got to make lemonade." So she went out there and met them. And she says, "As long as I can cut them off, I'll just act like I did it on purpose. Like, hey, Prince is out of town. This is his house. He bought it 2 years ago. That window is his bedroom. That window is his studio. And there's a lake out back, but I can't allow you to go around. So this is as far as you can go." So she was like Miss Nice tour manager and charmed them for like 10 minutes and then said, "Okay, sorry, but you got to leave." And they left. So,
wow.
But point being, he knows her. Okay. Yeah. And he calls the house, "Alan there?" Not even is. There's not even an is Alan. It's just Alan there. And, she'd say, "Yes, Prince, how are you today?" Just to fuck with him. And then hand me the phone. And he was used to it, and she was used to it. And it was, it wasn't a thing. It was just how we rolled. That's how he called people. Right? So I have on the answering machine, it's like, "Alan, this is Prince. Please call me." It's not much more than that. But Amir heard this stuff, So about a month later, for whatever reason he called here and the phone machine was on. We were out. And he said, and now this is on the roll call. He said, thank God I got the answering machine. Now I feel like I've actually made it in this business. I'm on your roll call. So that's his message, right?
Oh my God.
I mean, it's a pretty nerdy thing to do in the first place, but it started with the James Brown one because that shit was so priceless. And then it was like, okay, that's kind of cool to keep. Maybe I'll get a few more.
I heard, did D'Angelo leave messages on your answering machine?
Oh, yeah.
I heard that Miles Davis left a
Davis.
message machine. Tell me
Tell
about
that
that.
little purple, Miles talked real raspy.
Yeah.
Tell that purple motherfucker to call me. Quote unquote. No, he said little purple motherfucker.
I'm sure you probably made that connection.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's so great.
No, if it wasn't for Prince, I would have never met Miles Davis. So if you know that's maybe the most exciting thing to happen.
So I mean, you came on with Prince during the end of the 1999 tour.
Yes.
How was that first night walking into that situation? I mean, were there when you're first kind of going in and you're kind of analyzing not only how people are, I guess, welcoming you in, if that's even a thing. Because you're kind of coming in, and anytime somebody new gets added, it's like, meh. But could you stop yourself from analyzing, looking at how James did things and how Prince did things and go, oh yeah, what are some similarities to the way they ran their show, and what did your first night look like there?
Well, the biggest similarity was simply that they were both perfectionists.
Yeah.
And insisted on outstanding musicians and uber rehearsed, so that not so much that there couldn't be something spontaneous in the show if he felt like it, but the band would be so rehearsed that whatever he signaled for them to do, they were right there on his butt, right there with him. That was the first. But I had kind of suspected that of Prince after I saw the Controversy show on the Controversy tour. And that was a super, super tight. And I just walked out of there. It's like, oh my God, this shit is tight. Everything is tight. The sound, the lights are musical. They're artistic. It isn't just somebody flashing a bunch of lights. It's like the lighting director's part of the band. And that made an impression on me. So once I got there, I kind of knew what to expect. I knew how he rolled, at least artistically.
Yeah.
But the experience was really bizarre, partially because I had just left the Kiss tour. The Kiss tour was a suit and tie gig.
Which seems so weird. That's weird to me.
Their thing was, and maybe it's because they wore such bizarre outfits, that they wanted all of their business people, their management people, looking Madison Avenue. So I'm out there on the road with a bag full of like 2 or 3 pinstripe Madison Avenue Brooks Brothers suits and ties, and playing that role because that's what the gig called for, right? There were 2 shows left on the Kiss tour. It was winding down, and I'm in catering, and a fellow named Tommy Marzullo, who was the production manager, coincidentally, for both Prince and Kiss. And he comes to me and he says, so what are you doing after the tour's over? I said, well, I'll go home and wait for the phone to ring like any freelancer. And he said, well, you got any interest in Prince? Because his 1999 tour, they're going through road managers like water. And they're looking for somebody. And I said, hell yeah, that's, when does it start? And he says, well, the tour's been on the road for several months, so they're already established and rolling, so your gig shouldn't be too difficult, but they need you immediately. and they're willing to send somebody to interview. We were playing Universal Amphitheater in LA the next day with Kiss, and Jamie Shoup, who had been one of Prince's road managers, but worked in the she actually worked for Stephen Fargnoli in the management office. She came out to Universal Amphitheater, interviewed me. We rode back to town together after the show, and I got hired. So I left the Kiss tour. I asked them if they'd let me go a little early in order to take this Prince gig. So I literally got off of one tour and the next day jumped on the next. The gig was in San Diego, the Prince tour. I remember walking up the ramp of the arena in San Diego, which coincidentally, I had just played with Kiss like 2 nights earlier. I mean, it was crazy. And there were people backstage who had said, "What, you again? You back with," made no sense. Like he just left here with Kiss and now he's back with this guy 2 days later. But I walk in and of course I've got like a Madison Avenue suit on, and I think I had a trench coat or something, and a briefcase and a suitcase, a shoulder bag with my clothes, and everybody's in sweats. Everywhere I look, there's purple sweats. The promoter, Billy Sparks, he's got sweats on.
Oh, Billy.
The band has sweats on. Morris and the Time hanging out have sweats. Everybody.
Oh, my God.
Vanity and the Girls got sweats on. And they looked at me like I was the tax man that had just shut them down or something. Right. And so there was definitely a curiosity. And then I find Stephen Fargnoli, introduce myself. We talked for a while, and he says, "Okay, don't be pushy with Prince. Let him warm up to you. Let him get to know you. He'll let you know when you're in, but don't press up because he doesn't like that." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. You want to pay me not to work? It's cool.
Right.
Whatever. However you guys want to roll, I'm just here to help." Okay. Yeah. So he introduces me to Big Chick, the bodyguard, Chick Huntsberry. And we get to know each other a little bit. And I run out real quick. I find a runner to send out to some store to buy me some sweats. They weren't purple, but at least let me get out of this suit, right?
Right.
And then a couple of days later, I had to do some hotel booking for future cities that were coming up in the following weeks. And like any artist, every artist has their own preferences for the types of hotels. And, the artists I worked for were very particular. So I said, I better go to Prince. And we had met. I mean, we shook hands the first day. He said, "Welcome aboard." And that was it, nothing else. And I would go just before they were going to go on stage, he and the band. I would go to the dressing room door and walk him to the stage. If there was anything unusual about the venue that he should know, I would tell him. Sometimes Chick would send me to go look at the crowd because Prince wanted to know if it was predominantly black or white because his set list depended on the answer. But that was the limit of it. We didn't have any real dialogue. Huh. So I needed to talk to him about these hotels. So I go to Chick and I said, "Do you knock on the door for me? I really got to talk to Prince. I got to make some decisions in a hurry about some future hotels." And Chick, of course, had a Southern drawl that went with his look. The bib overalls and the Southern drawl just went together like milk and cereal. And he said, "Well, buddy, I don't know if that's a good idea." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, what, is he in a bad mood or something?" "No, it's not that. But if you're going to ask him something like that, he's going to think you don't know what to do yourself. He's going to think you don't know your job and you're asking him to do it for you." And I'm like, "Really? It's like that?" And so I said, "Okay, forget Prince. Hey, Chick, what kind of hotels is he like?" It's like, now I got to trust that Chick is going to give me the real deal, because if Chick doesn't like me, he could send me to the wrong hotel and get me fired. So it's like, okay, I got to trust this guy that I just met 2 days ago, but whatever. It worked out. That's so good. I was on the tour about a week before Prince and I had any meaningful dialogue at all, other than just hello. How are you today? Just, the bare minimum of conversation. And we had a show in St. Louis. It was either St. Louis, Kansas City, can't remember which. And after the show, I was in the hotel lobby bar with Bobby Z. Fink was there. I think Brown Mark was there. I think the whole band was there anyway. And we were at we got our drinks and we sat at this huge round table in this hotel lobby bar. And we're just sitting there kicking it, and everybody's in a good mood. It was a good show, and we're just, talking about whatever, who knows, the weather or basketball. I don't know what we're talking about. And all of a sudden, we look up, and here comes Prince and Chick across the lobby in our direction. So the first thing I noticed is that everybody got quiet. The whole joyous atmosphere
just went away.
It was a wrap. It was over. Everybody got tense. You could just see everybody go like this. And I'm like, what the fuck? What is wrong with these people? It's like you just had a great show. And what, are you scared of them? What's this about? So my radar is just all over the place. I don't know what to make of this yet. This weird guy who doesn't come out of his room. He doesn't talk to people. None of it makes sense to me. So, as luck would have it, the one vacant seat was next to me. So, of course, who comes and promptly sits down next to me. And the whole table's quiet because they're all waiting to see, why is he here? He doesn't usually hang out in the hotel bars. I think that's the only time I could probably count on one hand only time I ever saw him go to hotel bars if they had a piano. And he might go down there and actually play the piano.
Wow, that's cool.
I saw that a couple of times. But this is not a guy who hung out in hotel bars. He just didn't. So I guess the band was figuring, is he going to cuss him out? Did they miss a hit? Something about the show or what? They didn't know what to expect because it was so unusual. He sat down next to me. The whole table's quiet. And it was one of those weird quiets where you're just like, oh, shit, what's going to happen?
Right.
And then he just calmly turns in my direction and he says, tell me some James Brown stories. He knew I had worked for James Brown. Supposedly, according to Paranoia, that's why he hired me, that he figured if I could handle James Brown, I could handle him. And
that's awesome.
I don't remember what I told him. I wish I could remember what stories I told him, but I'm pretty good at thinking on my feet. I might have made something up, who knows? But he wanted James Brown stories. He gets James Brown stories. And from that point on, we talked like old friends. That was the moment. From then on, I couldn't get him to shut up. It was like, please stop calling.
Yeah. I love the mention of Billy Sparks because he is such a funny character. I met him one time. It was at a show and I can't remember what it was, but I was out in the lobby and Billy was on the phone and I walked up to him and I said, oh, Billy, it's an honor to meet you. I said, can I get your autograph? And he goes, I ain't signing a goddamn thing.
Really?
He said, no offense, but if I put my name on something, it's because
that's funny.
I think it's because he was in the middle of he must have had some type of legal thing going on or whatever, and he just didn't want to sign.
Right. So wrong question at the wrong time. Billy is a sweetheart. And
yeah, he was funny. He did it with a smile. He did it. I'll give you a Prince story.
I'll give you a Prince story that's not funny, but is important to the history, and I've never read this. Billy Sparks is a very private person. Billy deserves enormous credit for elements of Prince's career, and I'll tell you why. After Purple Rain, there was a bit of a backlash at Black radio about Prince. Because the feeling was, okay, he's outgrown us. Now he's crossed over. He's a rock star. He's untouchable. He's not doing interviews. And the black media has a thing about like, hey, if we played your records long before those white stations played them, brother, Without us, you wouldn't have never got to first base. And now you're on home plate with the white boys. You're on Dick Clark. You're the shit now. And what about us? Do you remember us? Billy Sparks single-handedly handled PRN Productions, Paisley Park, whatever you want to call it, relations with black media. He was the guy who knew all the main players from Tom Joyner on down in black radio. And because of his relationships, they continued playing Prince records when sometimes they didn't even fit the format because they were too pop.
Yeah.
He did the same with the black press. And it was a very specific strategy because all of the publicity now for Prince was in mainstream media. And black media felt dissed. Billy was the guy who saved those relationships and turned it around and made most of black media understand that just because he's crossed over, this is not some Uncle Tom who forgets where he came from. And all of that credit belongs to Billy Sparks. I can't think of another single person. Nobody at Warner Brothers, nobody else in our office. It was all about Billy. And I understood that pretty early on because Billy was one of the promoters when I came aboard and one of the first to open up to me. And I think he was just curious, like everybody else. It's like, here comes this white guy with these suits on, and he's like so different from anybody here. He doesn't fit. What's the deal with him? Who's he? Did this the accountant send him? Did Farnoli? Is he a spy for Farnoli? I think they want to figure out what's the angle. It's got to be more than just a last minute road manager. There has to be something else going on.
Here's your brother. Brothers in the thesis. I can't thank Billy enough for all of his support for me through the years. Hey, Eric, how you doing, brother?
Eric.
Oh yeah, and he worked Eric's solo albums and the Madhouse stuff to death. The jazz radio stations we didn't even know existed. Billy found them. Billy's an angel and really deserves credit as much as anybody who was in the managerial and promotion end of Prince's career. And Prince understood it and had a relationship with Billy that lasted well into the 90s, if not, I don't know when they finally stopped working together.
Yeah, that's when I met him was the 90s. And that was just a really, really funny moment because that was just like, because that was the first time and I didn't know how to take him. And he was just so funny and accommodating, but he was just like, yeah, but I'm not signing anything.
The funny thing about Billy too is that the role he played in the film is very much real. I mean, he didn't have to act. That's part of Billy. There is that side of him that is exactly like how he was portrayed in the film. However, there's another side to him that's extremely serious, intelligent. He lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in a college town around smart people and reads a lot. I mean, Billy Sparks is more than one thing.
Yeah.
And I think the public only knows the one thing, and that's the kind of character that was in the movie, which was fun and loving and so on, but kind of one-dimensional. And there's a lot more to Billy than that. And he deserves a lot of credit. And I never hear anybody talk about it. And I think part of the reason is that I don't think he's ever done interviews. And I assume that's by his choice.
Why do you think now aligning that with the other artists that you've worked with, why do you think that black radio had such a love-hate relationship with Prince, but never, ever let go of Maxwell, who you've worked with, D'Angelo, who you've worked with, Raphael Sadiq, who you work with? Why do you think that relationship, because technically a lot of those artists did still kind of do the same experimental type of music. They kind of, dip in and out of R&B, but they still kind of go off on their own. What do you think? What's the difference in their eyes, do you think, as far as how black radio embraces those particular artists? But with Prince, it was kind of like, nah.
Well, in the case of Maxwell and Sadiq, their music is pretty much, they've always, I mean, experimental and versatile, yes, but they always kind of make sure to try to have at least one or two joints on their records that are format friendly for black radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly because they've never really crossed over to pop radio. That's their only outlet.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, they know what they're doing. I mean, you know, Raphael's an amazing writer, but he could write a tune for the Rolling Stones as quick as he can write one for D'Angelo, and they'd be equally great. But he also knows that the only people that are liable to play a Raphael Sadiq record right now is black radio. He's not going to get a lot of play on pop radio. It's just not. It's not that time yet. I hope his day comes. He deserves it. Because he makes remarkable records.
Really does.
You know, with Maxwell, it's almost an entirely black thing. I mean, does he have white fans? Of course he does. But in terms of defining his music, it's pretty much straight ahead black music. Now, D'Angelo's a whole other story because
Black Messiah was like,
yeah,
like way.
Yeah, it's a little bit. There's parts of it that are pretty out there. But there were a couple of joints on there that were accessible.
Great album, fantastic.
But by the same token, D is the kind of artist that never makes a song for a specific reason. I mean, if you went to him and said, "Hey, this album is great, but you need one more song, you need a hit," he'd look at you like you were crazy.
Yeah.
I don't even think he recognizes why songs are hits. You know what I mean? I don't think Untitled is any different to him than I'm hard pressed for a title than Devil's Pie or something that's a little more out, less radio friendly. He doesn't listen to radio. He listens to WBGO in Newark, jazz radio.
Yeah.
Which you get, it's a Newark station, but it serves New York.
Yeah.
And basically, when he's riding around town, he's listening to that. He doesn't listen to pop radio. He's usually pretty late in knowing when somebody blows up. Because if a friend of his doesn't come to him and say, "Hey, you got to check out this Van Hunt," or "You got to check out Billie Eilish," without that reference, he never would.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's so many art. Yeah, again, we had talked about this before. There were so many amazing artists that are out there right now that are just,
including Prince. Despite Prince, D'Angelo is the purest artist I've ever worked with. Just in terms of being a pure artist. In the sense of, if he was a painter, he would be some guy living in a lonely house on the top of the hill, painting canvases,
abstract,
and never even coming down to show them. He's that guy, and as a result, the music is anything he feels like on any given day, which became a horrendous challenge to try to channel into a career in terms of sequencing records and finding something that you can promote in the media with the prejudices and the barricades that various elements of the media have, because you can't pigeonhole him anywhere. I mean, the first record, Brown Sugar, yes, that was a pretty. It was a great record, but unmistakably a mainstream black music record.
Yeah.
But, starting with Voodoo, it's like, dude, go for it. Now, as a music fan, I adore everything he does. It's great. But if you're going to sit there and say, okay, how are you going to promote this shit into a career that's going to sell enough tickets to support the kind of show he wants to take on the road? It's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, he hasn't had any misses yet. I mean, it's always been like vastly different from album to album, but there's not really been, a whole bunch of misses. What year did you come on with Prince? Was that 1983 or 80?
Well, it was the 1999 tour. I finished the tour, but that was as a freelancer. So I went home and actually was on the road with Cameo when I got a call from Paranoia to come to Minneapolis. And that was in 83. It was August of 83.
Did you happen to see by chance this fiasco? Where it's Michael Jackson and James Brown on stage, or Paul Prince on stage, who plays guitar for a little bit. And then, of course, as things kind of go over badly, he's kind of doing his thing for the crowd. Of course, this is James Brown's show, and he called Michael Jackson on the stage, he called Prince on the stage. And then Prince decides that this is like one of these iconic mythos things, and he doesn't realize that the lamp on the stage is the prop, and he falls up to the audience, and then Prince is never seen again at that point. And of course, then James Brown kind of comes out. But I don't know if you've ever seen that video.
Yeah, of course.
Were you there during that period of time?
I was in Minneapolis, and I got a call late that night from Bobby Z, who was with Prince. That was the Beverly Theater in Beverly Hills, and Bobby Z was with him at that gig, and he called me. It's like, yo, man, you're not going to believe what happened tonight.
Did he talk about Prince falling on the stage, or did he talk about the fact that
told me the whole
Prince
thing?
Michael Jackson? Because there's so many legendary stories about that. Quincy Jones did some interview and said that after the show that Prince was so upset and so embarrassed by it that he tried to run Michael Jackson and his mom over.
He was so upset.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, oh my gosh, this is craziness.
No,
I was like, I wonder if Alan was there for any of this to kind of.
I wasn't there, but I got the lowdown from all three of them. Bobby, Chick, and when Prince got home a couple of days later, I got his version too.
Oh, what was Prince's version?
It was just, affirming what happened and that he was really pissed off because Michael set him up.
Right.
The real story is Michael set him up. James didn't know anything about Prince. He may have heard his name and realized that there was an artist named Prince. He didn't know what he looked like. He didn't know anything about Prince. Michael's on stage. If you watch the whole clip.
Yeah.
Now, James has known Michael since he's 5 years old. He's like a stepson, like a godson.
Yeah.
Michael used to come to his shows and sit in the wings and study him. And James has literally known him since he was a kid, right? So the idea of Michael coming on stage was not at all unusual. Michael goes up, he does his bit, does his moonwalk or whatever the hell he does, and shrieks a couple times, and the people go crazy. It's Michael, Michael Jackson. And you see Michael whisper in James's ear. If you watch the video, he's in James's ear telling him to call Prince up. Now, mind you, this is a period of time where Prince is starting to challenge Michael. And the little magazines for the teenagers like Black Beat magazine and some of the other little magazines that used to be on the newsstands, they were already saying, is Prince the new Michael Jackson? I mean, they were starting to build, the press was building up a rivalry. Michael's in James's ear telling him to call Prince, and then Prince calls him up, and you can even see by Prince's tone of voice. He's kind of like, yeah, whatever, okay, Prince, yeah, Prince, come on up, Prince, whatever. It's like he's not even really excited about it. So Prince gets up there, and he doesn't know what the hell to do. Michael Jackson has just freaking worked the stage. You don't follow Michael Jackson.
Right.
What are you going to do? And the thing that Prince can do that Michael can't do is play a guitar.
Right.
So he borrows a guitar. But the song is just a riff. It's just a vamp. And there's nothing really to do on a guitar. All he could do was play rhythm. It's not the kind of thing you could really solo and show. I mean, it ain't Purple Rain.
Yeah,
it's a James Brown vamp. Right? So he gets tired of the guitar, realizes that ain't working. So that's where you showed the clip began, where he came up to the front of the stage and started trying to clap the hands and just get people into something. Because Prince was at a loss. He really didn't know what to do. and he hated the fact that he was up there. And then he finally figures he's been there enough. Now it's time to it's time to exit. And you know, he's jumping off the stage, and he doesn't realize that street lamp is just a cardboard prop. It's not a rigid thing. He's grabbing it to get leverage to jump off stage, and of course he tears the stage down, tears the prop down with him, which was just the coup de grace. So it was, you know, one of his very embarrassing moments. And
yeah, I never really thought of it, because that's one of the questions that I had was about this the Michael Jackson Prince rivalry that was kind of concocted, not really concocted, because I mean technically they were like the first two black artists that we got to see on MTV.
Right, they both felt it.
Yeah, it kind of like set up this. It was the whole thing was like a setup, but the magazines always pitted them against each other a lot. Who's
sure? They're trying to sell magazines. I get that, and if you buy into it, you buy into it. I mean, it was the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Yeah. So, no, we didn't know about Michael Jackson creeping around the bedrooms of the little boys at the time, or whatever he did or didn't do. You know, there was no scandal about Michael yet. So he's everybody in America raised Michael Jackson. They're proud of Michael Jackson, from a little kid to Jackson 5, and now he's, you know, Beat It or Billie Jean, whatever the records were. I don't know if that was out yet, but I think so. And you know, he's now this superstar. And then you got Prince, who at that particular time is known for the bawdy lyrics, and you know, working on stage in bikinis, and really pushing boundaries. So it's the Rolling Stones and it's the Beatles, and it was just a great. You couldn't invent something better. It was just perfect.
Did you ever get a chance to meet Michael?
No.
Yeah, did Prince ever talk about Michael Jackson at all, as far as like the rivalry, or did he even feel even?
Yeah, they apparently played ping pong for a couple of minutes. You know, he kind of. I mean, look, Prince certainly respected Michael. There's no question.
But did he feel threatened by Michael's level of success, or just kind of like, okay, we're on our own?
Did he ever mention anything like that?
Yeah.
No, because that would show a lack of confidence or insecurity. That to mention that in Prince's mind, to mention that would be showing weakness. So no, he was much too macho to ever admit that would get under his skin. But I'm sure they both felt it a little bit. You read that shit long enough, it's going to affect you.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, Prince was the type that after Purple Rain blew up, it would be, you know, it wouldn't surprise me to sit there and say, "Hi, has Michael made any movies lately?" You know, he wasn't above snide remarks.
Yeah,
he definitely was in a hurry to tell everybody in our camp that Michael couldn't play ping pong.
Nobody could beat.
But I might add that back to the James Brown concert. As soon as he came off stage, Prince left. He was out. So any rumors about what happened after the show are bullshit. He was gone.
Yeah, I have a problem with while I have nothing but mad respect for Quincy, I did get an opportunity to meet him too, but I was like 13 or 14, and I really didn't know his body of work. While I have nothing but respect for him, he's not a huge Prince fan, so a lot of the stories that he normally has to share about Prince are not very glowing.
I don't think he ever got over. I don't think Quincy ever got over the "We Are the World."
Yeah.
Because I think he took that as a personal diss. Well, of course he did. He called him personally and tried to change his mind, and Prince rejected him.
And that video of Prince sucking on that lollipop during that award show, Prince takes the lollipop out of his mouth and gets it to Quincy, and Quincy was actually going to put it in his mouth.
Yeah, that was weird. That was weird.
I don't know what's happening, but that's classic video. Don't know what that is, but I want to watch it again.
Quincy is great though. Quincy has amazing stories. Do you think I got stories? Talk to that guy.
Oh yeah, he's doing the stuff with Sinatra. I didn't realize all his involvement with Sinatra and all that stuff. I was just wow, man, was just mind-boggling, unreal. Yeah. There is a picture. A lot of people, I see if you search for pictures of Eric Leeds and Prince, people always show this photo. It's like that's Alan. And even in one of the
hey, I'm back in the suits.
Even in one of our broadcasts when Eric was on the show the first time, I had a bunch of photos that were in a folder and it picked this one. I was like, ugh. And Eric was like, that's my brother Alan. I was just like, yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. I get Facebook messages asking if I'm still playing sax and who I'm playing with.
This picture here, Prince doesn't take a lot of photos with people. Matter of fact, there's not a whole bunch of people that had the opportunity to get their picture taken with Prince. And for whatever reason, you're in like this whole string of shots with Prince. Where is this? And obviously this was a little bit of a setup. But man,
that's an elevator in an airport.
Okay.
Yep. And it's either Paris or London. And we had just come through immigration, and we were going to. We were either I don't remember if we were flying in or flying out, but it's an elevator in an airport, and a photographer jumped in the elevator just as the door was closing.
Wow.
And it was some paparazzi, and they got this and got several shots, and we couldn't do anything about it until the elevator stopped.
Eric says it was in Japan.
Okay, he's probably right.
Yeah, he remembers everything.
As a matter of fact, I'm sure he's right.
He remembers what you had for dinner when you went on your family vacation.
As a matter of fact, Eric might be in Japan. And if he interrupts my broadcast anymore, I'm going to send him to Japan. No, he's more than welcome.
Yeah, Eric said he just arrived in Europe, so that's where he's at. Yeah, it is kind of shocking how much you do look like your brother in this period of time. And he
looks like me, 5 years old.
Right, that's right. You're 5 years old.
Right.
That's right. You're right. He looks like you. That's correct. Let's get
Poor
it.
Guy.
Right. Yeah, and you said you got approached quite a bit of people saying, hey, are you playing sax anymore? Was that happen on a regular basis during this time period? You said.
No, it happens more now. Because people just say, oh, Leeds, that's the guy who played sax with Prince,
I don't know what this means anything, but Eric said mushy mushy.
Yeah, of course.
Does that mean something to you?
That's Japanese.
Oh, is it? What is it, Japanese? What does it mean?
Look it up.
Okay. I'll look it up.
It's clean. Facebook won't throw you off.
Okay.
Let me say this. I finally thought of an answer to your question that had me puzzled about influence. And I think the best advice I ever got was actually from Eric. When we were kids and he first started playing saxophone, I would take garbage cans and turn them over because I actually took drums in school. This is grade school now. I took drums in school for about 2 weeks before I quit, which is a whole other story. But I had drumsticks, and I had fantasies about, being such a music fan and loving not just singers, but the music and so on. I had fantasies of what it would be like to grow up and be a musician. Now, the fantasies weren't serious enough for me to have the patience or the discipline to learn an instrument. I never did. However, I had these drumsticks. So when he got to the point where he could play sax well enough to play along with records that we liked, we had Ray Charles records and Little Richard records and whatever the hell we had at the time. And he would play along with them, just as most kids do when they're starting out. And I would take garbage cans and turn them over and create a drum set because I wanted to play with him. I'm the big brother, little brother. He's playing sax. I think that's mad cool. And I want to be part of this shit. So I would start banging on the cans. Now, mind you, I could keep time. I mean, I had a sense of rhythm, so it wasn't like I was really screwing it up. He may differ, but his advice was, I'm the musician in the family. Do us both a favor. Don't play drums. That was the best advice I ever got. Because if I had continued to play drums, I probably would have been a second-rate drummer playing in some lounge act for $50 a night and just angry all my life. James Brown used to do this to me. So this is incredible that you have no idea. When I met James Brown, the first time I met him was to interview him for my radio show. And afterwards, he insisted on doing air check, bumpers for me. And I'm just enthralled that I'll get one. And he does like 10. He does, hi, everybody. This is James Brown. And the time is, hi, everybody. This is James Brown on the Alan Leeds show. Alan, what's the weather? He did all these bumpers. And half of them we never used, but it's hysterical. He just went on and on and on and on. I wish I still had my radio voice. You can tell it's long gone.
But it's iconic. It's like iconic.
Yeah, right.
All right. So let me just say this to the audience. I told you when we started this show that I'd listened to other interviews as well, and I want to do a couple of shout outs. If you love Alan's stories, he's got so many of them. So there's a couple interviews I want to give shout outs to. The first shout out I want to give out to is for Questlove. Questlove has a show on Questlove Supreme, and he really digs deep quite a bit into like you would expect Questlove to do. He does some amazing interview with Alan, and of course, I would love to have Questlove on the show. Alan, we're going to have to talk. Right. Alan, I'm also going to reach out to you via email too, because I've got some ideas about how to fix music, and so I might bounce some ideas off you.
That's but a scary thought.
Hey, it is.
That's
and the second interview is by my good friend that does the Prince podcast, Michael Dean. His podcast, the Prince podcast, it was a fantastic interview, about 3 hours long, but he talks about every single album. He goes through every single album and that Alan was a part of or was present for, and really kind of digs deep into the detail of, how Alan felt about each and the, how did you feel about Purple Rain? How did you feel about Love Sexy? And so he really, really digs deep. So shout out to Michael Dean and the Prince podcast group, Podcast Juice, and definitely check that out. 2 great interviews if you want to hear more from Alan Leeds. And by all means, please, I'm going to make myself big for this one. By all means, please make sure that you pick up this book right here. It's out. There Was a Time, James Brown, The Chitlin Circuit, and Me by Alan Leeds. It's got a foreword by Questlove, and it is it's gotten rave reviews. I just got it a couple of days ago. I cannot wait to absorb it. And I can't. Jeff, you were about to say something? I'm sorry.
No, I was going to mention the book. You got it.
Absolutely. And I just put up Amazon. I just put up the Amazon link to the book, so you can definitely pick it up. Yes, it's got our affiliate thing tied to it. So you do it right before you do your Christmas shopping. Just click on that link before you do Christmas shopping. Alan, it is an honor.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for having me. It's fun to do this, and I enjoyed it.
Yes, it's been great, and you have to get some rest. You have to come back on for a part 2 further down the line, maybe next year at some point, because I'm sure that there was actually a ton of questions we had, and I'm glad you stopped us because we would have kept it till midnight.
Actually, I'm going to tell you something. In about a year, maybe a year and a half, there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff to talk about both Prince and James Brown, based on some projects that are in the works. So.
Yeah, real quick question though. Do you know anything what's going on with the Netflix documentary? Just in the closing. Is it happening? Is it still on hold?
It's very much happening.
Good.
I don't think it's scheduled until 2023 for meaning an air date.
Wow.
But
Nice.
it's happening in a big way.
Well, that's
Yeah.
fantastic news.
And
Yes.
And I think it's going to be. I can't really talk about it, but
yeah.
from what I know about it, it'll be the gold standard for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know we had interviews with Owen Husney and other people that were also been involved with that whole process, and there's a lot of hush hush stuff going on and a lot of movement, but it's so great to know. Yes, Sarah couldn't have said it better. Just great. What a living archive. Thank you so much. Yes, we got a bunch of thank yous. Thank you from Angela. Thank you from Joanne. All these fine people.
Well, thank everybody for sitting through this nonsense for all this time. What have we been talking 2.5 hours?
This is worthwhile nonsense, that's for sure.
My wife is going to say you haven't talked to me that much in the last month.
My wife says it to me every show. After every show, are you done now? Alan, thank you so much, and it's been an honor.
It has. Thank you.
My pleasure to be with you guys, and good holidays, and everybody stay well, stay safe, wear masks when it's appropriate, get a shot.
Yes.
You know,
happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas.
All of that.
Peace.
All of that. Peace. We'll see you later.